talking a little bit about sort of what it means to make disciples in the church, what we should be about. And so certainly I talked last week a little bit about initiation. I want to talk about that second piece that Jesus says in Matthew 28, verse 20, teaching them to obey everything that I have commanded. You know, it's very easy for us to fall into that teaching to obey is just a list of rules. So I remember I met this man in an office that I worked in when I was in seminary. And he discovered that I was a believer, and we had this brief conversation, and he said this thing to me. He said, well, we know who the Christians are. They're the people that don't drink and don't smoke and don't swear. And I said to myself, well, I don't smoke, and I swear a whole lot less than I used to, but I'm not sure I make it into that category then. And again, teaching to obey is not simply a list of rules. Do this, don't do that, do this, don't do that. Although that is part of it. There are some things that we ought not to do, that's not cool. And there are things that we ought to do that we don't do. That is part of it. But it's not about making the grade. Teaching to obey is not about making the grade. It is about teaching people to be conformed to Christ. To conform their lives to Christ, not out of obligation because they must or else they'll be hosed, but rather because they love the Jesus who saved them. That in being conformed to Christ is about obeying Christ. And again, it is not just a teaching of rules. It's often modeling the reality in our own lives, what it means to be forgiving, what it means to love. Paul says, imitate me as I imitate Christ. There's a sense of imitating Christ. The imitation of Christ is what obeying Christ also means. His command to love our neighbors as ourselves and to love God with our whole heart, soul, and mind. That's really what teaching to obey means, and it leads to this sense of being conformed to Christ. Again, I said one of the introductory sort of videos of this, the point is not just getting it right or checking the boxes, doing the good. Jesus is inviting us in that relationship with Him to transform our hearts, to be transformed into little Christ-like persons, that we love the good, not just do the good. And that sometimes has to do about instructing what the good is, but I think more has to do with actually showing what the good is, how we forgive, how we love. One of the greatest questions I think we can ask ourselves at the end of every day is not so much, did I do it all right, but perhaps, did I love as Christ loves? And that's really what it means. So I think ultimately to obey everything He has commanded is to be conformed into the likeness of Christ. And so that's the other part of this, is this part of this discipleship, is this transformational work that turns us, that shapes us into those who are like Christ, that are conformed to Christ, to not only do the good, but to love the good.